Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Appalachian Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The first time I heard about the events that transpired in Wexler Hollow, a forgotten corner of McDowell County in West Virginia, I was researching mining accidents for my doctoral thesis at the University of Virginia. It was 1963, and I had been granted rare access to sealed records from the early 1920s, documents that were supposed to detail mining fatalities and industrial disputes. What I found instead was something far more disturbing: a series of official reports, newspaper clippings, and personal testimonies about a ravine that locals had come to fear with almost religious reverence. Wexler Hollow sat nestled between two imposing ridges of the Appalachian Mountains, isolated from the nearest town of Welch by nearly 15 miles of treacherous mountain roads. In 1922, it housed approximately 200 souls, most employed by the Blackwater Coal Company. The settlement consisted of company-built homes arranged in neat rows, a company store, a small church, and administrative buildings. Beyond the settlement, dense forests climbed up the surrounding mountains, interrupted only by the occasional hunting path or logging road. What distinguished Wexler Hollow from countless other mining towns was a deep, narrow ravine that cut through the forest approximately 2 miles east of the settlement. Local folklore held that the ravine had served as a meeting place for women accused of witchcraft who had fled persecution in Virginia and Pennsylvania during the previous century. Whether true or not, the locals called it the Witches' Ravine and generally avoided it. The company records indicate that Wexler Hollow was, in most respects, unremarkable until February 1922. Production reports show average coal output, routine safety incidents, and the usual labor tensions that characterized most mining operations during that era. Yet something changed that winter, something that would transform this quiet hollow into the site of inexplicable horror. According to statements from Silas Merrick, the company's accountant, whose meticulous records provided much of what we know about the daily life in Wexler Hollow, the winter of 1921 to 1922 had been unusually harsh. Heavy snows had isolated the hollow for weeks at a time, and food supplies had dwindled dangerously low by early February. The miners had been growing restless, and there had been talk of a strike if conditions didn't improve. The company had brought in additional security personnel, former Pinkerton agents, to maintain order. Merrick's personal journal, which I discovered filed separately from the official company documents, paints a picture of a community under strain even before the incidents began. "The men grow more sullen by the day," he wrote on January 30th, 1922. "Last night I heard Pruitt and some of the others talking about organizing. Blackwater won't stand for it. Clark's men are watching the troublemakers closely. I fear violence before the thaw comes." Nathan Clark, the head of security mentioned in Merrick's journal, features prominently in the official records. A former Pinkerton detective, Clark had been hired by the Blackwater Coal Company specifically to prevent unionization efforts. His reports to company headquarters, preserved in the corporate archives, are cold and clinical, detailing worker movements, identifying potential agitators, and recommending corrective measures for those who spoke out against company policies. It was against this backdrop of tension and isolation that several miners, led by a man named Jeremiah Pruitt, ventured into the forest on February 12, 1922. Their stated purpose, according to company records, was to hunt deer to supplement the community's dwindling food stores. The group consisted of 6 men: Pruitt, Edwin Harlan, Vincent Codle, Isaiah Dawes, Zachary Powell, and Benedict Yates. Pruitt, as Merrick's journal reveals, had been a particular concern to the company. A veteran of the Great War, he had returned to the mines with new ideas about workers' rights and collective bargaining. Pruitt speaks of dignity and fair treatment, Merrick wrote in early February, words that make Clark and his men nervous. Yesterday, I overheard Clark telling his deputy that Pruitt might need to be reassigned to a more dangerous section of the mine. The hunting expedition might have been a genuine attempt to secure food, but company correspondence suggests that Clark saw it as an opportunity to monitor Pruitt and his associates away from the settlement. A telegram sent from Clark to company headquarters on February 11th states simply, "Pruitt party departing tomorrow ostensibly to hunt. We'll monitor closely." What happened next is documented in fragmented accounts pieced together from later testimonies and the journal of Dr. Ambrose Kent, the company physician who would later be called to examine the survivors. According to these records, the hunting party split into 3 pairs upon reaching the forest edge. Pruitt and Harlan headed northeast, Codle and Dawes went directly east, while Powell and Yates traveled southeast, a path that would inadvertently take them near the Witches' Ravine. Dr. Kent's journal provides a fascinating glimpse into the medical practices and social dynamics of the isolated mining community. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, Kent had come to Wexler Hollow in 1918, apparently seeking a quiet place to practice after serving as a field surgeon during the Great War. His journals reveal a man of science struggling to reconcile his rational training with the superstitions and folk beliefs of the Appalachian miners he treated. "These people cling to old ways," he wrote in an entry dated December 1921. "They speak of granny women and folk remedies with more reverence than modern medicine. Many refuse treatment until their ailments have progressed beyond my ability to help. They fear the ravine east of the settlement with particular intensity, attributing to it properties that border on the supernatural. I have attempted to explore it myself, to demonstrate its harmlessness, but have been met with such vehement opposition that I've abandoned the effort for the sake of maintaining the community's trust." The first indication that something had gone terribly wrong with the hunting expedition came when Zachary Powell staggered into the settlement shortly after nightfall, alone and in a state of extreme distress. Dr. Kent's journal entry, dated February 12, 1922, describes Powell's condition in clinical terms. Subject presented with extreme pallor, dilated pupils, and profuse cold sweating, pulse rapid and weak, respiration shallow and irregular, subject non-responsive to questioning, repeating only the phrase, "the stillness," at irregular intervals. Physical examination revealed no injuries or signs of trauma. Administered 10 megadour morphine sulfate subcutaneously to induce sedation. A search party was hastily assembled, comprised of 10 miners and 2 security personnel. Armed with rifles and lanterns, they followed Powell's tracks back into the forest. The official report, filed by Nathan Clark, states that they found Benedict Yates's body at approximately 9:45 p.m. at the edge of the ravine. The report is notably sparse on details about the condition of the body, mentioning only that Yates appeared to have died from exposure to the elements. However, a personal letter written by one of the search party members, Harlan Wicks, to his brother in Charleston, tells a different story. "What we found wasn't Yates as I knew him. The body was intact, but something was wrong with his face. His eyes and mouth were opened so wide it seemed inhuman, like his last moments had been pure terror. The strangest part was there were no footprints around him other than his own and Powell's. Whatever frightened him to death, it left no trace." Some of the men wanted to bring the body back immediately, but Clark insisted we continue searching for the others. I can't help but think he was more concerned with finding Pruitt than with giving poor Yates a proper burial. The search party continued looking for the other 4 hunters until the early hours of February 13th, when a snowstorm forced them to return to the settlement. Powell remained in a state of catatonia for 3 days, according to Dr. Kent's records. When he finally spoke coherently, His account was documented in a transcript that was later sealed by company officials. According to this transcript, which I discovered tucked between mining accident reports, Powell claimed that he and Yates had heard unusual sounds coming from the ravine, what he described as a harmony of whispers, neither male nor female, neither human nor animal. Curious, they had approached the edge of the ravine, where the sound abruptly ceased, replaced by what Powell described as a stillness so complete it felt solid, like you could touch it. Powell reported that Yates had suggested they leave immediately, but as they turned to go, the stillness moved toward them like a wave. Powell described running without looking back, hearing Yates screaming behind him. The transcript ends with Powell saying, "The stillness was following me. I could feel it just behind me all the way back. I don't think it can leave the forest, but it's still there, waiting. It knows us now. It's so empty, and it wants to be filled." The 4 other hunters, Pruitt, Harlan, Codle, and Dawes, never returned. A larger search party was organized once the snowstorm subsided, but no trace of the missing men was found, save for a single rifle belonging to Pruitt, discovered leaning against a tree approximately half a mile from the ravine. Following these events, the transcript indicates that Nathan Clark imposed a strict prohibition on entering the forest east of the settlement. Company records show that this order remained in effect until the mine closed in 1931, during the early years of the Great Depression. Dr. Kent's journal entries from the days following Powell's return reveal a growing concern about the psychological impact of the incident on the community. "The disappearance of Pruitt and the others has cast a pall over the settlement," he wrote on February 16th. "Conversations cease when I enter a room. The miners exchange glances, laden with meaning I cannot decipher. I have observed several residents standing at the eastern edge of the settlement after dark, staring into the forest. When questioned, they claim to be merely smoking or getting fresh air, but their manner suggests otherwise." An entry dated February 20th notes, "Powell's account of what occurred at the ravine has spread throughout the settlement, despite Clark's efforts to suppress it. I have had 7 patients today complaining of sleep disturbances, all involving dreams of whispers and stillness. Clark dismisses this as hysteria. But I wonder if there might be some environmental factor at play, perhaps a gas leak from the mine affecting cognitive function, or a fungal contaminant in the grain stores causing hallucinatory effects." Silas Merrick's journal from this period describes a settlement increasingly divided. "The disappearance of Pruitt has had an unexpected effect," he wrote on February 22nd. "Rather than dampening talk of organizing, it has inflamed it. Rumors circulate that Clark or his men had something to do with Pruitt's disappearance. Others say it was the ravine, that it somehow took the men who ventured too close. The more superstitious miners have begun wearing small bags of salt in their pockets and marking their doorways with symbols I don't recognize. Clark has requested additional security personnel from headquarters. For almost 5 weeks after the incident, life in Wexler Hollow attempted to return to normal, though Dr. Kent's journal notes an increase in cases of insomnia and anxiety among the miners. Then, on March 20th, 1922, something happened that shattered any semblance of normalcy. According to the night watchman's log, at approximately 2:15 a.m., Marjorie Pruitt, Jeremiah's wife, walked out of her home and toward the forest edge. The watchman, Roland Burke, called out to her, but she reportedly did not respond or acknowledge him in any way. Burke's log states that he followed her at a distance, concerned about her safety but hesitant to approach directly as her behavior seemed so unusual. When Marjorie reached the forest edge, Burke claimed she stopped and stood perfectly still for nearly 5 minutes. Then, according to his account, she began conversing with something I could not see or hear. After several minutes of this one-sided conversation, Burke approached her. He reported that as he drew near, Marjorie turned to him and said, They're waiting in the stillness. They want us to join them. Burke's log indicates that he escorted Marjorie back to her home and informed Dr. Kent of the incident the following morning. Dr. Kent's journal contains a detailed account of his subsequent examination of Marjorie, noting that she had no recollection of leaving her home or speaking with Burke. Kent diagnosed her with somnambulism induced by grief and prescribed bed rest and sedatives. Marjorie Pruitt's prominence in the community added weight to the incident. According to Merrick's journal, she had been a respected figure even before her husband's disappearance, a woman of education who had taught at a school in Welch before marrying and moving to Wexler Hollow. Mrs. Pruitt has always been a voice of reason, Merrick wrote on March 21st. To see her succumb to this collective madness is particularly troubling. If a woman of her intelligence and composure can be affected, none of us are immune. A letter from Marjorie to her sister in Richmond, dated March 22nd, and never sent, I found it among Dr. Kent's personal effects, suggesting he had intercepted it, provides a disturbing glimpse into her state of mind. Dearest Margaret, I write to you with the strangest news. Jeremiah has not abandoned me, as everyone believes. He is waiting for me in a place of perfect quiet. I hear him sometimes, calling to me from the stillness. He says there is peace there, a peace none of us have known in this world of noise and struggle. I will join him soon. Do not grieve for us. We will be together in the quiet place. 3 nights later, according to multiple witness accounts compiled by Clark, 7 residents of Wexler Hollow, 5 women and 2 men, were observed walking in unison toward the forest at approximately the same time as Marjorie had done. The night watchman and several miners who had been awakened by the commotion intercepted them before they reached the trees. All 7 individuals reportedly resisted being turned back, though none with violence. Like Marjorie, none had any recollection of their actions the following morning. A climate of fear quickly enveloped the settlement. Nathan Clark established a curfew and doubled the night watch. Dr. Kent's journal entries from this period express his growing concern about a contagion of the mind affecting the residents. He wrote, I can find no physiological cause for this collective somnambulism. The affected individuals share no common medical history, diet, or living arrangements that might explain their behavior. The only common factor is proximity to the events of February 12th. Kent's scientific mind struggled to make sense of what was happening. On March 26th, he wrote, I have begun to consider theories that I would have dismissed as absurd mere weeks ago. Is it possible that Powell's stillness is not merely a product of his traumatized psyche, but something tangible that has somehow affected the collective consciousness of Wexler Hollow? I recall reading of certain infrasonic frequencies that can induce anxiety and hallucinations in humans. Perhaps there is some natural phenomenon in the ravine, a peculiar acoustic property, or a subterranean gas emission that produces similar effects. I must investigate this possibility, though Clark's prohibition on entering the forest presents an obstacle. On March 25, 1922, the situation escalated dramatically. According to the company's daily log, at approximately 1:30 p.m., a thick fog descended over Wexler Hollow, unusual for that time of day and year. Multiple residents reported hearing whispers emanating from the mist, similar to what Powell had described hearing from the ravine. By 2:00 p.m., the fog had become so dense that visibility was reduced to mere feet. Harlan Wicks, in another letter to his brother, described the fog as unnatural in its movement and consistency. It didn't drift or flow as fog should, but seemed to pulse, like something breathing. The air within it was cold in a way that went beyond temperature, a coldness that seemed to seep into your thoughts. The whispers. They weren't speaking any language I could recognize, but somehow I understood they were calling specific names. My name was among them. It was in this fog that Vincent Codle, one of the 4 hunters who had disappeared on February 12th, reportedly returned to the settlement. His reappearance is documented in statements from at least 12 different witnesses, including Nathan Clark himself. These statements, while consistent in confirming Codle's return, vary significantly in their descriptions of his appearance and behavior. Clark's official report states simply that Codle appeared disoriented and unable to account for his whereabouts since February 12th. Dr. Kent's journal, however, provides a more detailed and disturbing assessment. Subject exhibits extreme emaciation, consistent with severe malnutrition, yet claims he has no hunger or thirst. Skin is unnaturally pale and cool to touch. Most concerning are the eyes, which show no reaction to light and remain dilated regardless of illumination. Subject speaks clearly, but affects an unusual cadence, pausing at irregular intervals as if listening to something beyond normal hearing. A statement from Abigail Harlan, wife of the still-missing Edwin Harlan, describes her encounter with Codle. He came to our door standing in the fog. I thought at first it was Edwin returned, but when I saw it was Vincent, I asked him where Edwin was. He looked at me for a long time without blinking, then said, "Edwin has found the quiet place. He's waiting for you there." When I asked where this quiet place was, Vincent smiled in a way that wasn't right, like his face had forgotten how smiles are supposed to look. He said, "In the stillness, where everything ends and begins." According to collected testimonies, Codle walked through the settlement, stopping at various homes and the company store. He reportedly spoke to several residents, though accounts of these conversations are fragmentary and inconsistent. Some claim he asked unusual questions about the daily routines of the residents, while others report that he simply stared at them without speaking. Silas Merrick's journal entry for March 25th provides one of the more coherent accounts of an interaction with Codle. He found me in the company office, though I had locked the door. He stood before my desk, water dripping from his clothes, though it hadn't rained in days. "What do you fear most, Silas?" he asked me. Before I could answer, he continued, "Is it the dark, the silence? Or is it the moment when you realize that everything you believed about the world is wrong?" I told him I feared nothing but God, as my father taught me. He smiled at that, a terrible, empty smile, and said, "What you call God has never visited the ravine. There is only the stillness there and the whispers within it." What is consistent across all accounts is that Codle eventually made his way to the center of the settlement, where he addressed a gathered crowd. The words attributed to him in various testimonies include, "The stillness is coming. It's found a way out of the forest." Another witness quoted him as saying, "They're so lonely in the ravine, they want company." At this point, according to Clark's report, he attempted to take Codle into custody, intending to secure him in the company office until his condition and the circumstances of his return could be properly assessed. What happened next is described in Clark's unusually terse report. Upon attempting to restrain Codle, he became non-responsive. Within minutes he collapsed and ceased all vital functions. Dr. Kent pronounced him deceased at approximately 2:45 p.m., cause of death undetermined. Dr. Kent's journal contains a more detailed account of Codle's sudden death. "I observed no signs of trauma or struggle. One moment he was standing. The next he crumpled to the ground like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Upon examination, I could detect no heartbeat, respiration, or pupillary response. The body cooled at an accelerated rate, reaching ambient temperature within minutes rather than the hours typically required. Most disturbing was the expression frozen on his face, one of profound relief, as if death was a welcome release." Kent's entry continues with a disturbing postscript. "During the examination, I noticed a peculiar phenomenon. Though Codle was undoubtedly dead, there were moments when I distinctly heard whispering emanating from his body, not from his mouth. but seemingly from within his chest cavity. The whispers were too faint to discern words, but the cadence reminded me of Powell's description of the sounds from the ravine. I have shared this observation with no one, as I fear it would only further inflame the hysteria gripping the settlement. The fog lifted by nightfall, but the damage to the community's morale had been done. According to company records, 15 miners and their families departed Wexler Hollow the following day, abandoning most of their possessions in their haste to leave. Production at the mine fell sharply as absenteeism rose. Dr. Kent's journal notes a dramatic increase in complaints of insomnia, with many residents reporting dreams of standing at the edge of a great emptiness or voices calling from a deep place. Clark's reports to company headquarters during this period reveal a man struggling to maintain control. A telegram dated March 26th reads, "Situation deteriorating rapidly. Request immediate additional security personnel and medical experts. Possible contamination from mine affecting mental stability of residents." The company's response, received the same day, was less than supportive. Financial constraints prohibit additional personnel at this time. Contained situation using available resources. Priority remains maintaining production levels. On March 28, 1922, 3 days after Codle's return and death, another incident occurred that further destabilized the community. According to the night watchman's log, at approximately midnight, a sound like distant singing was heard throughout the settlement. The log describes it as a woman's voice, though no words could be discerned, rising and falling in an unfamiliar melody. The source of the singing was eventually traced to Marjorie Pruitt's home. When the watchman and Dr. Kent entered, they reportedly found Marjorie seated at her kitchen table, perfectly still and silent. The singing continued, seemingly emanating from all around her rather than from her directly. According to Dr. Kent's journal, when addressed, Marjorie did not respond or acknowledge their presence in any way. After several minutes, the singing abruptly ceased, and Marjorie collapsed. Dr. Kent's examination found her alive but unconscious, with an unusually slow pulse and respiration. She remained in this state for nearly 24 hours before awakening. Upon regaining consciousness, she claimed to have no memory of the incident, but told Dr. Kent that she had been dreaming of the ravine and the women who had found peace there. Kent's journal entry following this conversation reveals his growing unease. Mrs. Pruitt spoke of the ravine with a reverence I found disturbing. She described women in white, who dwelled in the depths, who had fled persecution and found sanctuary in the embrace of the stillness. When I pressed her on whether these were merely dreams or if she believed these women to be real, she looked at me with unexpected clarity and said, "What is real, doctor? Is it only what we can touch and see, or is it what we know to be true in the deepest part of ourselves?" I had no answer for her. In a personal letter to a colleague at Johns Hopkins, dated March 30th, which was never sent, as mail service to Wexler Hollow had been interrupted by another snowstorm, Kent wrote, "I fear I am observing the formation of a new religious movement born of isolation and grief." The stillness Powell described has become a deity of sorts to many here, particularly those who have lost loved ones to the ravine. They speak of it in terms that remind me of how the ancients conceptualized the afterlife, not as a place of judgment or reward, but as a state of peaceful non-existence. What troubles me most is that I find myself drawn to this concept in moments of exhaustion, when the constant stress and fear have worn away my rational defenses, the promise of stillness, of an end to struggle and uncertainty. It holds a terrible appeal. Como muerte. By the end of March 1922, conditions in Wexler Hollow had deteriorated significantly. Company records indicate that nearly half the workforce had abandoned the settlement, despite the financial hardship this would cause them. Those who remained reported increasing difficulty sleeping, with many refusing to close their eyes at night for fear of what they might dream. The night watchman's log contains numerous entries documenting residents walking toward the forest edge during the night, only to be intercepted and returned to their homes. Silas Merrick's journal entries become increasingly erratic during this period, suggesting that even this pragmatic companyman was not immune to the influence spreading through the settlement. On March 31st, he wrote, "The ledgers no longer make sense to me. The columns of figures seem to rearrange themselves when I'm not looking directly at them. Yesterday I found myself writing the same phrase over and over instead of recording production figures. The stillness waits. I don't remember doing this. I hear the whispers now, even during the day. They're coming from inside the walls." In early April, Nathan Clark took the unprecedented step of requesting assistance from the state authorities. His telegram, dated April 3, 1922, requested immediate medical and security personnel to address an outbreak of mass hysteria. The response, received the following day, informed him that assistance would arrive within the week. Before help could arrive, however, the situation reached its horrifying climax. According to the night watchman's log for April 5, 1922, at approximately 3:00 a.m., the temperature throughout the settlement dropped dramatically, with frost forming on windows despite the mild spring weather. Shortly thereafter, residents began to emerge from their homes, moving silently toward the forest edge. The watchman, now joined by Clark and the remaining security personnel, attempted to intercept them as before, but the sheer number, reportedly more than 60 individuals, overwhelmed their efforts. The log describes the residents moving with singular purpose, neither hurrying nor hesitating, their expressions vacant yet somehow peaceful. Clark made the decision to follow the procession rather than attempt to physically restrain them. His report states that the residents moved in unison through the forest, following an indirect path that eventually led to the Witch's Ravine. There, according to his account, they formed a circle around the edge of the ravine and stood in silence, staring down into the darkness below. What happened next is described in Clark's report in remarkably restrained language. At approximately 3:45 a.m., the assembled residents began to sway in unison. A sound similar to what Powell described in his testimony became audible, a harmony of whispers that seemed to emanate from the ravine itself. At 3:52 a.m., Marjorie Pruitt stepped forward and descended into the ravine. Others followed her example. Despite our attempts to intervene, 38 individuals entered the ravine before we could establish an effective perimeter. Those we prevented from entering offered no resistance once physically restrained, but continued to stare into the ravine with expressions of longing. A handwritten addendum to this report, apparently added later and initialed by Clark, reads, "I have not included in the official account what I glimpsed at the bottom of the ravine as dawn broke. There was movement there, figures in white that appeared to be female in form, surrounding the settlers who had descended. They were not solid, as normal humans are solid. The light seemed to pass through them. They raised their arms in welcome. Then a mist rose from the ravine floor, obscuring my view. When it cleared, there was no one visible below, neither the settlers nor the white figures. May God have mercy on my soul for what I allowed to happen." Dr. Kent's journal entry for April 5th is notably brief. "God help us. They walked into the darkness willingly. Those we managed to save don't remember anything, but they're still looking eastward toward that accursed place. The stillness is calling them." A more detailed account appears in a personal letter written by Harlan Wicks, who was among those who followed the procession but was prevented from entering the ravine. In a letter to his brother, dated April 7th, he wrote, "I remember walking toward the forest, though I had no conscious intention of doing so. It was as if I was sleepwalking, yet I was aware of my surroundings in a way that one is not during normal sleep. I felt drawn toward the ravine by something I cannot name, a promise of peace, of an end to the fear and uncertainty that has plagued us these past months. What I saw at the ravine defies rational explanation. The air above it shimmered like heat, rising from summer roads, though the night was cold. When people began to descend, they did not climb down as one would expect given the steep sides. They walked forward, as if on level ground, yet somehow moved downward without falling. Most disturbing of all were the figures that seemed to rise up to meet them, pale, indistinct forms that reminded me of how fog sometimes takes on human-like shapes in the right light. These forms embraced those who descended, and when they did, the people changed. Their outlines became less distinct, their movements more fluid, like they were becoming part of the mist. I would have followed them if Clark's men hadn't held me back. Part of me wishes they hadn't. The state authorities arrived on April 7, 1922, led by Dr. Claudia Marsh, a specialist in psychiatric disorders from Johns Hopkins University, and Captain James Forrester of the West Virginia State Police. Their official report describes finding the remaining residents of Wexler Hollow in a state of profound catatonia, with many displaying unusual fixations on the eastern forest and periods of unprompted weeping or laughter. A search party was organized to investigate the ravine and attempt to locate the 38 missing residents. The report of this expedition, authored by Captain Forrester, is clinically detached. The ravine extends approximately 300 feet downward at a steep angle. The walls are primarily shale and loose stone, making descent hazardous. At the bottom, we discovered a narrow stream and evidence of recent human activity, including footprints and disturbed vegetation. Despite an extensive search covering approximately 2 square miles of the ravine floor, no trace of the missing individuals was discovered. Dr. Marsh's assessment was included as an addendum to Forrester's report. The remaining residents exhibit symptoms consistent with severe psychological trauma. Many display selective amnesia regarding the events of April 5th, while others have constructed elaborate confabulations to explain the absence of their neighbors and family members. Most concerning is a persistent delusion shared by multiple subjects, the belief that those who entered the ravine are not missing, but have joined with the stillness and are waiting for the others to follow. Dr. Marsh's personal journal, which I discovered in the archives of Johns Hopkins University, provides a more nuanced view of her experiences at Wexler Hollow. On April 8th, she wrote, "There is something deeply unsettling about this place that goes beyond the obvious tragedy of mass disappearance. The settlement feels wrong somehow, too quiet, as if sound itself is muted here. Last night I dreamed of standing at the edge of the ravine, looking down into darkness that seemed to go on forever. From that darkness, voices called to me by name. I awoke convinced that someone was in my room, whispering just below the threshold of hearing. When I lit my lamp, there was no one there, yet the whispering continued for several seconds before fading." On April 9th, she noted, "I interviewed Zachary Powell today, the sole survivor of the original hunting party. He remains largely nonverbal, responding to most questions with blank stares. However, when I mentioned the ravine, he became agitated and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. 'It's not empty,' he said. 'Everyone thinks it's emptiness, but it's not. It's full of something we don't have words for.' When I asked him to elaborate, he returned to his catatonic state. His pupils were so dilated that his eyes appeared black. The decision was made to evacuate the remaining residents of Wexler Hollow. They were relocated to various facilities across the state for observation and treatment. The Blackwater Coal Company officially closed the mine on April 15, 1922, citing insurmountable operational challenges. The settlement was abandoned. In a final chilling note found in Dr. Kent's journal, dated April 10, 1922, he wrote, "I am leaving with the others tomorrow. I tell myself it's to continue treating my patients, but in truth, I fear what might happen if I remain." The stillness Powell described, "I've felt it at the edge of my consciousness these past weeks. It waits with infinite patience those who entered the ravine. I don't believe they are dead. Sometimes, in the moments between wakefulness and sleep, I hear them whispering. They sound content. Last night I dreamed I stood again at the ravine's edge. Marjorie Pruitt was there, but changed. Her outline blurred, her movements fluid like smoke. "Join us, Doctor," she said. "There's room for everyone in the stillness." I woke to find myself standing at my bedroom window, looking eastward toward the forest. I had no memory of leaving my bed. The official records end here, with the abandonment of Wexler Hollow and the relocation of its remaining residents. The mine and settlement were left to decay, reclaimed by the forest over the following decades. The incident was classified as a case of mass hysteria triggered by isolation, harsh conditions, and the disappearance of the original hunting party. However, my research uncovered several unofficial accounts that suggest the story didn't end with the evacuation. A newspaper article from the Charleston Gazette, dated October 1927, reported that a logging company had begun operations near the former settlement. The article mentioned that work had been suspended after 3 loggers went missing. Their equipment was reportedly found at the edge of a ravine with no signs of a struggle or accident. A follow-up article, published 2 weeks later but relegated to a small column on page 12, reported that the logging operation had been permanently abandoned. The company cited unsuitable terrain and environmental conditions as the reason. But a quote from one of the loggers suggested other factors. "There's something wrong with those woods. The sound isn't right there, it's too quiet, and then sometimes you hear voices when there's no one around." Most of the men refused to go back after the disappearances. Can't say I blame them. A report from the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources, dated 1938, documented an unusual absence of wildlife in the area surrounding the former Wexler Hollow settlement. The report noted that hunters and trappers avoided the area, citing local superstitions about a stillness in the forest that swallows sound and thought. The report's author, biologist Franklin Montgomery, wrote, "The absence of wildlife cannot be explained by normal environmental factors. The forest appears healthy, with abundant food sources and suitable habitat. Yet, in a radius of approximately 3 miles centered on a particular ravine, coordinates redacted, we observe no mammals larger than rodents, no birds, and few insects. Sound recordings made in this area reveal an ambient noise level 40% lower than in comparable Appalachian forest environments. Local guides refused to remain in the area after sunset, citing folklore about women in white who lured travelers into the ravine. While I dismiss such superstitions, I cannot provide a scientific explanation for the unusual acoustic properties and wildlife patterns observed. Perhaps most disturbing was a letter I discovered in the archives of the University of West Virginia, written by Dr. Claudia Marsh in 1943, shortly before her death. In it, she confessed that 27 of the evacuated residents of Wexler Hollow had, over the years following their relocation, disappeared from the facilities where they were being treated. Staff reports indicated that, in each case, the individuals had been last seen staring eastward toward the Appalachian Mountains. No trace of them was ever found. Dr. Marsh wrote, "I am an old woman now and no longer fear professional ridicule." What happened at Wexler Hollow defies rational explanation. The stillness they described, it isn't confined to that place. It spreads through minds like a contagion. Even now, decades later, I sometimes wake in the night and feel it reaching for me, patient and empty and hungry. I find myself drawn eastward toward the mountains. I have taken to securing myself to my bed at night, lest I wander in my sleep. The most troubling aspect is that part of me wants to go, to surrender to that silent call. What awaits in the ravine is not death, I think, but something else, a transformation we lack the language to describe. Dr. Marsh's medical records, which I obtained from Johns Hopkins with considerable difficulty, indicate that she died in her sleep on December 12, 1943. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, but a nurse's note in her file mentions finding the room unusually cold on the morning her body was discovered, with frost patterns on the inside of the windows, despite the building's heating system functioning normally. In 1951, a graduate student in anthropology from the University of Pittsburgh, Eliza Vaughn, traveled to McDowell County to collect folklore from the region. Her field notes, preserved in the university's archives, contain several references to stories about Wexler Hollow and the Witch's Ravine. Local residents told her of ghost lights seen in the abandoned settlement on certain nights, and strange mists that rose from the ravine even on clear days. One account, recorded from an elderly woman in Welch who claimed to have had a cousin who worked in the Wexler Hollow mine, described a local belief that the ravine had once been used for rituals by women accused of witchcraft in the 19th century. According to this informant, these women had discovered a thin place between worlds at the bottom of the ravine, where they could step sideways into somewhere else. The informant claimed that the women had not died, but had gone into the stillness, where time doesn't move and no one grows old or suffers. Vaughn apparently became fascinated by these stories, and, despite warnings from her informants, traveled to the site of the former settlement in June 1951. She never returned from this expedition. A search party found her car parked on an old logging road and her backpack and camera at the edge of what they identified as the Witch's Ravine. No trace of Vaughn herself was discovered despite an extensive search. In 1959, the state of West Virginia designated the area around the former settlement as protected forest land, prohibiting development or resource extraction. The official reason cited was environmental conservation, but internal memos I uncovered suggest the real motivation was to discourage human activity in the area. One memo, written by a senior official in the Department of Natural Resources, stated simply, "Some places should be left undisturbed. What sleeps in the ravine should remain asleep." My own investigation ended in 1963. After discovering these records and beginning to compile them for my thesis, I experienced a series of increasingly disturbing dreams of standing at the edge of a deep ravine, listening to whispers rise from below, feeling a profound stillness approach from behind. I abandoned my research and chose a different topic for my dissertation. I tell this story now because I believe enough time has passed that it can be shared safely. The events at Wexler Hollow occurred over a century ago, and whatever influence emanated from the Witch's Ravine has likely dissipated with time. Yet occasionally, when I find myself alone in quiet places, I catch myself listening for that harmony of whispers that so many residents of Wexler Hollow described, the voices calling from the stillness, promising peace for those willing to descend into the darkness. The records I uncovered remain sealed in the University of Virginia archives, classified as historically sensitive. The coordinates of Wexler Hollow do not appear on modern maps, and the roads that once led to the settlement have long since been reclaimed by the forest. Perhaps this is for the best. Some mysteries should remain buried in the stillness of forgotten places. As for Zachary Powell, the only surviving member of the original hunting party, records indicate he was transferred to the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia, where he remained until his death in 1951. His medical files note that he never spoke again after being evacuated from Wexler Hollow, but would often be found standing at the windows that faced east, toward the mountains, his lips moving in silent conversation with something only he could perceive. The last document I discovered was a handwritten note tucked into Powell's file, presumably written by an attendant at the asylum. It read simply, "Powell passed peacefully in his sleep last night. In the moments before death, he spoke for the first time in 29 years. He said, 'The stillness has found me at last.'" He was smiling when we found him. I sometimes wonder if the stillness is still there, waiting in that nameless ravine in the Appalachian wilderness. I wonder if it's still calling to those who might hear it, those attuned to its empty harmony. And in my darkest moments, I wonder if it's slowly spreading, patient and inevitable, reaching out through the minds it has touched, looking for new vessels to carry it beyond the confines of its forgotten hollow. In 1962, a year before I abandoned my research, I received a strange letter postmarked from Welch, West Virginia. There was no return address, and the handwriting was shaky, as if penned by someone elderly or infirm. The letter read, "I know what you're researching. I was there in 22, though just a young man working in the company store. I saw them walk into the forest that night. I saw what followed them back out. It's patient, you know. It can wait decades if it needs to. It remembers those who have heard its whispers. Sometimes I think it's been waiting since before people came to these mountains, empty and hungry for something only we can give it. If you're reading about Wexler Hollow, it knows you now. It will find you eventually, in the quiet moments, in the spaces between your thoughts. Listen for the whispers. They're getting louder, aren't they?" The letter was unsigned. I tried to trace its origins, but the postmark was smudged, and inquiries in Welch led nowhere. Shortly after receiving it, the dreams began, dreams of standing at the ravine's edge, feeling the stillness reaching for me. That was when I decided to abandon my research. But the dreams never fully stopped. They come less frequently now, but with greater intensity when they do appear. In them, I see the figures in white that Clark described moving among the trees at the bottom of the ravine. They look up at me with faces that shift and blur, calling me by name. And behind me always is the stillness, approaching like a wave, patient and ancient and hungry. If you ever find yourself in the mountains of McDowell County and the forest around you grows unusually quiet, so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat, turn back. Don't listen for whispers, don't look for the ravine, and whatever you do, don't answer if something calls your name from the stillness.